fantástico, como siempre. Y no quiero alargar un poquito más el proceso. Quiero presentar a nuestro siguiente ponente, señor Martin Trappe, un gran maestro para todos los que amamos los hipogeos, todos los que amamos la micología. Es muy difícil para mí tenerle aquí, delante. Para mí es un gran honor. Es un sueño para la micología en España que usted esté aquí hoy. Trappe encontró su primera trufa salvaje mientras realizaba unas investigaciones sobre hongos radiculares para su doctorado a finales de los años 50. A partir de ese momento se convirtió en un adicto de las trufas. Aujourd'hui, il y a Monsieur Martin Trappe entre nous. Pour moi, c'est avec énorme plaisir d'être là. Trappe, c'est un grand passionné de la truffe. Et je ne vais pas faire plus longue parce que je crois que lui, il ne faut aucune présentation. Il nous va parler de la truffe. Monsieur.
Thank you.
Él va a hacer un poquito de traducción, nuestro gran amigo Efrén Cáceres, que está aquí con nosotros, otro gran honor. Dentro de unos días él nos hará su conferencia y nos hace el honor de traducir un poquito a las palabras de Jim. Gracias, Efrén.
Buenas noches. La verdad no sé dónde ponerme. Es que necesito ver lo que dice en las...
Mira,
Los micrófonos de este tipo es un peligro porque me dan ganas de cantar.
Well, I want to thank the organizers of this meeting, and especially Ita and all the folks who have been showing us a good time. But we'll have some more good time in doing science during the meeting, and so I'd like to follow Pierre with a bit of science and history. Now, first, I need to explain that...
Let me translate a little bit.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Quiero agradecer, es un honor para él estar aquí y que va a tratar de tocar algo de ciencia en los hongos hipogeos, en las trufas.
Okay. Efren and I had been working together for 25 years, something like that. And he served as a translator for me, and sometimes when I've given talks in Mexico. So I just want to warn you that if he says something crazy, it's something he made up, not me.
Hemos trabajado cerca de 25 años y le he tratado de traducir algunas pláticas en diferentes países.
Okay.
Pero no voy a hacer ninguna broma. Esta noche va a ser seria.
Okay. And if I get sleepy up here, Efren will notice and he'll push a button and it'll send a current through this thing here and wake me up again.
Le voy a dar toques eléctricos porque a estas horas le dan ganas de dormir.
But the whole matter of the history of truffles has interested me for a long time. And of course, you folks in Southern Europe know there's been a long and distinguished history on study of truffles.
El interés de él sobre las trufas ya tiene muchos años, pero no cabe duda que aquí en Europa, en el sur de Europa, la tradición del interés de trufas es muy antigua.
But you're acquainted fairly well with your own histories, so I will take us back a little farther than perhaps your records would show about the early history of use of truffles and the predecessors of those of us who now enjoy not only eating them, but the science of truffles.
Un poco largo. Que nos va a llevar en esta plática nos va a llevar un poco atrás, muchos años atrás, sobre de cuándo hay récords de cuándo el hombre empezó a encontrar las trufas, no solamente en estos siglos, sino muchos miles de años atrás.
Do you have to point this somewhere?
Yes, good. Yeah.
Point it that way? Oh, okay.
Jim, make shorter sentences so I
Yeah.
have to remember a lot.
Let's start with the early documentation of truffle use.
La primera documentación del uso de los trufas.
It doesn't mean the earliest use of truffles, just the earliest documentation. You see a clay tablet here inscribed in cuneiform, and it's from the library of the king of the Amorites.
Es una tabla de arcilla del reino de los amoritas.
The Amorites, we'll show you a bit in a moment, but they were enemies of the Hebrews and most other people,
Enemigos de los hebreos y de mucha gente.
and became very rich because they loved to attack and plunder other cities in the upper Tigris and Euphrates River.
Les gustaba atacar a muchas sociedades alrededor de ellos en el río Éufrates.
So here's the Middle East, and the Amorites I'll show you in a minute, but they were up around here, and their capital was near the present day of Mosul.
Los amoritas ocupaban la parte norte del Medio Oeste.
The Amorite Kingdom, as you can see by the three arrows, was fairly extensive.
Ocupaba una extensión muy grande.
This is the Dead Sea in what is present-day Israel.
El Mar Muerto con Israel.
Assyria were contemporaries, Sumeria and other countries. Here is the palace of the king as reconstructed from archaeological digs.
El palacio del rey de Amorita reconstruido en la parte de arriba.
Here is how the palace looks today.
Así se ve el palacio hasta en la actualidad.
Those clay tablets were preserved. They were all on clay, and the library of the king was huge. Thousands and thousands of clay tablets with the cuneiform.
Estas tabletas de arcilla se preservaron porque las calentaban y se convertían en cerámica. Y había miles de tabletas.
The Amorite Kingdom, however, was overwhelmed by the neighboring Sumerian Empire, and they burned everything they could, including the library.
Esta sociedad o estas gentes quemaron casi todo lo que se encontraba, entonces destruían, pero las tabletas quedaron preservadas.
But the clay tablets were not destroyed because they were clay. Instead, they were baked and turned into ceramics.
Las convertían en cerámica y por eso se preservaron.
Archaeologists of that area have been going over all these clay documents, you might say now, for 30 years, and they still have a long way to go.
Los arqueólogos han tratado de traducir estas tabletas y llevan 30 años y aún hay tabletas por traducir.
But one of them they came across was correspondence between the king and his chief steward.
Una de esas tabletas que encontraron era una conversación entre él y el jefe steward.
The king expressed some very angry words at his steward.
El rey estaba muy enojado.
And in effect, he said, that last batch of truffles you sent me was no good.
Dice que la última mesa de trufas que me mandaste no estaba buena.
And his steward said, well, I got them for you. You wanted truffles.
Las conseguí para ti, querías trufas.
And this is what the truffle hunters brought to me.
Y los cazadores, los que encontraron las trufas fueron los que me trajeron.
So I bought them for you, Your Highness.
Las compré para ti y aquí están.
The archaeologists have dated these clay tablets, including this one, to about 1,750 years before Christ.
Las determinaron que tenían 1700 años antes de Cristo.
Now this is the oldest documentation we have
Esta
of
es la
use of,
documentación más antigua
truffles.
del uso de las trufas.
However, the Greek historian Herodotus was also known as the first travel writer.
El historiador griego Herodes,
And
primer escritor viajero,
he went to Egypt for several months,
fue a Egipto por algunos meses,
about 400 BC,
400 años antes de Cristo.
and he recorded everything he heard, and he asked many questions, and amongst these, he learned from some historian in Egypt that the king Ramses II
Documentó que el king Ramses el segundo
and the king wrote of having these truffles for royal banquets because they were very special.
él descubrió que utilizaban trufas para comidas reales.
So I think these pyramids were one of the Ramses that built them. There are these frescoes, and there are some, so I'm told, kitchenware implements here.
Se especula que muchos de estos símbolos son utensilios de cocina.
And here is what could be interpreted as a truffle.
Y aquí el círculo que está arriba parece interpretarse. Es una especulación que puede ser el dibujo de una trufa.
But we've not been able to examine its spores, so we don't know.
Pero no han podido examinar las esporas.
This would have been about 2,500 years.
Esto es 2500 años antes de Cristo.
Now, there was a lot more going on, too, and of course, most of you will know the story of Exodus. I'm not sure in Spanish what that would be.
La historia del Éxodo.
Exodus, yeah.
Exodus
And
en Egipto.
and how the Israelis, who were slaves in Egypt,
Los israelitas que eran esclavos en Egipto.
well, I won't go into the story except they got their rather begrudging go back here. Up, back, 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 back. No, that's forward. I didn't take a course in electronics.
There.
Okay. So they went down into the Sinai Peninsula and stayed there for decades.
Los israelitas emigraron hacia el sur en el monte Sinaí y estuvieron por décadas.
And one of the stories that's often told was about a food that appeared like magic out in the middle of the desert.
Una de las historias es que aparecía comida como magia en el medio del desierto.
Some Israeli mycologists have searched all the writings about that.
Micólogos israelitas tenían escrituras.
In ancient documents, the Torah, of course, the Old Testament of the Bible, and other writings about this event.
En el Antiguo Testamento se mencionaban estos eventos.
So here they were out in the middle of the desert, and these round, whitish things appeared on the ground.
Estas cosas blancas aparecían en la arena, en el suelo.
And there have been many speculations what that was, but those who have studied all the options say about the only natural food that would appear almost overnight. That's, of course, not quite accurate, but within a few days after heavy rains,
Siempre se especulaba que esto, después de llover, salían y se suponía que lo más
so they could go out and
eran trufas.
harvest this material, and it carried them through for food many times.
Y las cosechaban para comer. Muy a menudo.
Oh, there it is. Well, this is some modern Israelis out getting truffles, I guess.
Israelitas colectando trufas en el desierto.
I don't think the boys who do it are dressed in clean white shirts, but
Esta foto es
nonetheless,
más actual, no es.
this is not responding well.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, we'll forget that. What in the heck's going on here?
Be nice to it. There it goes.
Please. Okay, well, it's got about a 4-second lag here.
You use the computer.
Well, we'll skip that. That was
It's gonna use the computer.
here.
Next one. Next one. You want next one?
Yeah. Well, no, if it'll respond. Here we go. That's was my student from Kuwait.
Él es un estudiante que él tuvo, Abdul Majid al-Sheikh from Kuwait, de Kuwait.
He took me out to the truffle grounds around Kuwait.
Lo llevó al campo cerca de Kuwait.
But like all desert creatures, they more or less disappear during times of drought, which is more often than not.
Muchas criaturas desaparecen en.
So this was not in a truffle season.
No era la temporada de trufas.
And you can see there's not much there.
No hay mucho en el desierto.
But after a heavy rain,
Pero después de lluvias fuertes,
in this case of those Arabian area deserts,
en los desiertos árabes,
annual plants in the family Rosaceae
plantas anuales
yeah,
en la familia Rosaceae
form mycorrhizae with desert truffles.
forman micorrizas con trufas del desierto.
And in that area, there are several genera,
En esa área hay algunos varios géneros.
and they're found by the people who go out to look for them, look for a little mound in the sand
Las encuentran por
That-
pequeños
that when it dries, it starts shrinking and makes cracks.
hay rupturas en el suelo y se empieza a levantar.
And you just move the sand around with your hands, and there would be a truffle
Mueve la
underneath.
arena y se descubre el cuerpo fructífero de una trufa.
Now, I think this is meaningful in terms of early uses of truffles because they're easy to see
Es-
after a rainstorm.
Esto es fácil de ver porque después de la lluvia se remueve la arena y la descubre.
And I think that's maybe one reason that desert-dwelling peoples got onto the whole business
Y es
of
muy probable
harvesting
que como
truffles.
era más fácil de encontrarse porque la arena se mueve más fácil que
Here's one Tervisia claveri.
Terfesia claveri.
That's a cross-section of the interior. The brown patches are where the ripe spores are, and then with the white
Sección transversal es
tissue
donde
between.
lo color café o marrón son las esporas acumuladas.
Here's a Kuwait truffle market.
Es un mercado en Kuwait donde venden trufas.
And I was told that during a good truffle season, big trucks will go out and get full of truffles. They drive into Kuwait City, like, as he explained to me, like potato trucks bringing in a potato
En
harvest.
temporadas buenas se llenan camiones y camiones y los llevan al mercado del de la ciudad en Kuwait y las venden como si fueran papas.
These are I've eaten some, and they're not particularly interesting as food,
Las ha comido y parece ser que no saben muy buenas.
but they have a historic mystique, and so those people really...
Pero tienen algo de misterio en la historia.
This is a large species, Termania nivea,
Es una especie grande, se llama Tirmania nivea.
and it can get up to half a kilometer, or half of a kilogram.
Puede llegar hasta medio kilo.
This is a little one. It only is maybe 2 centimeters across,
Pequeña de 2 centímetros.
but its habit is to grow in clusters, so there may be 20 or 30, so they hump up the soil as well.
Pero crecen aglomeradas hasta de 20 cuerpos juntos y levantan el suelo.
And Abdul Majid, my student, told me that he went out and interviewed the nomadic Arabs.
Abdul, su estudiante, salió al desierto a entrevistar a los nómadas
to learn the traditions of truffle use by those people.
y para aprender la tradición del uso de estas trufas por esta gente.
And he learned that the kids look for them, and when they find them, they pop them out in their mouths and eat them like pieces of candy. It's considered...
Los niños tradicionalmente las encontraban y las comían como si fueran dulces.
Also, some of the bigger truffles, when fresh, the nomads will cut them in half and press them against the eyes for inflammation. People living in windy, sandy deserts have inflammation of eyes is a common thing.
Los nómadas adultos las utilizaban, las exprimían, se las ponían sobre los ojos para tratar inflamación.
And they told him it works beautifully.
Por tanta arena en los ojos y que eso les funcionaba bien.
Now, we'll switch south to Africa.
Ahora se mueve al sur en África.
And this general area here is the Kalahari and some adjacent deserts.
Esta área general es el desierto del Kalahari.
This is an aerial view of a typical Kalahari
Una vista aérea del
dry season landscape. The white is salty salt flats and so forth.
temporada de sequía, lo blanco son suelos salinos.
But there's a typical Kalahari landscape for truffles.
Y este es el paisaje del desierto donde hay trufas.
Some places there's some trees,
En algunos lugares hay árboles.
but just like in the deserts of Arabia and Palestine and so forth, they find the truffles in exactly the same way.
En la mayoría de los desiertos las encuentran de la manera igual. Se rompe el suelo y se abre.
In those societies, they tend to be pretty strongly hunter-gatherer. And this is a contemporary picture. It's not from a 1920 National Geographic
Esta foto
magazine.
es más actual de los 1920.
The women go out, they find a stick, or maybe they have a favorite one, and they look for these humps.
Las mujeres
And
llevan palos y con esos palos los utilizan como herramientas para mover el suelo.
and loosen the sand and then dig down in their hands to get it.
Las extraen moviendo la arena, removiendo la arena.
Here's one, it's a new genus that we named Kalahari Tuber.
Este es un nuevo género, Kalahari Tuber.
It can get quite large, the size of a large apple,
Tienen gran tamaño, hasta el tamaño de una manzana.
and in more recent times the Kalahari, the San people is their official name. They have been called the Bushmen, but that's out of fashion now. That was kind of a derogatory term from the early European settlement. But
Le llamaban Bushman, pero ya no se utiliza ese término para ellos. El nombre del monte.
some Europeans have taught the San how to make money off of truffles. So they buy them and ship them to Europe, where, for reasons I don't understand, since they have the tuber melanosporum and Italian white truffle and so
Gente
forth.
europea trataba de comercializárselo y comprárselo a estas personas para mandarlas a Europa.
A professor from the University of Namibia told me in a conversation that he went out and talked to Dasan people who were bringing in deserts from the truffles, truffles from the desert, and
Un profesor de Namibia fue a preguntarles a la gente de la arena
and he asked how much they were selling them for,
cuánto las vendían.
and it was about a tenth of a euro.
10 centésimos de euro.
And he told me he knew that
A eso las pagaban, a ellos.
being shipped to Europe for sale, and it can be out of season because the rainstorms and so forth come at a time when Southern Europe, for example, tends to be a bit dry.
Y las compraban en la época donde no era época de trufas en Europa y las mandaban para...
So he told these people, well, I don't know how he phrased it, but he said, they are being sold in Europe for $40, 40 euros
No
a
sabía
kilo.
que en Europa le estaban vendiendo a 40 euros el kilo y él estaba pagando 10 céntimos de euro.
And he got a kind of a sweet, what I'd call a sweet, innocent reply. The man who had brought in some that he was talking to said, well, we didn't do anything to make these truffles. We didn't bring the rain. We didn't do anything but dig them up. Why should we ask for more?
Dice que no les importaba que las estaban vendiendo muy caras en Europa porque dice que ellos no hacían nada más que solamente recogerlas. No, ellos no hacían nada por la lluvia, no las plantaban, solamente las recogían y no le importaba el dinero.
I imagine the Europeans will be teaching them more about economics.
Que tal vez les deberían enseñar sobre economía.
This is the record of the time, this is about 4 years ago, of the largest Kalahari Tuber known.
Este es el récord de este género nuevo, Kalahari Tuber.
And they are prepared in many ways. They can be eaten raw or cooked in various ways. But
Se las pueden comer crudas o cocidas en varias maneras.
to me, they have pretty much a bland taste, a kind of mushroomy taste.
Para él no parece que tenga mucho sabor.
Well, let's go to another desert country.
A otro país con desierto,
Well, you all would recognize it as
Australia.
Australia. You want to give the picture? The big yellow area in the middle of the continent is arid and semi-arid. You probably can't make out on the
La mayor parte del país del centro es desierto y semidesértico.
the highest rainfall in that area is about 200 millimeters a year.
La mayor cantidad de agua son 200.
But that comes in thunderstorms. It's rare for there to be overall rainstorms. So it's a very spotty, and you can have big thunderstorm here and one 50 kilometers away.
Los chubascos, ¿sí se dice? Aguaceros, chubascos, lluvias, torrenciales. Tormenta. Son muy esporádicos.
Well, there you can see from this area, or satellite photo. See, here's the forest all around the edge of,
La mayor parte de los bosques están en las orillas del país.
and there's a tremendous diversity of fleshy fungi there.
Gran diversidad de hongos en
And
los bosques de eucaliptos.
we did find a new morel, Claude knows about it, I'm sure, which was sequenced by Kerry O'Donnell in the United States, and he has a library of sequences of every truffle that's been collected, or every species, and they're,
You say
with the one exception,
Dice que ahí encontraron una especie nueva de morilla o morilla.
And that's the one that we sent to him. But
Kerry O'Donnell ya la secuenció.
yeah, these are not easy decisions to make. We found a place where we collected about 80.
No son decisiones fáciles de hacer y encontraron 80. About 80 what?
Specimens.
80 especímenes.
So we went back to the cabin we were staying in, and we had a big truffle or a morel feed.
Se fueron a la cabaña y las cocinaron.
And then we had some for breakfast.
Y otros para desayunar.
And then we got back to Canberra, where we were headquartered.
Se regresaron a Canberra, donde estaban estacionados.
We have a lot of friends. We gave them morels, and we dried a bunch, and we're eating them. And we got down to 4 specimens.
La regalaron amigos y les quedaron 4 especímenes de los 80 que traían.
I thought, well, they know all about the morels of Australia, but I guess we should keep a voucher specimen.
Vamos a guardar algunos vouchers de las 80, van a guardar poquito de los,
We got back to United States,
regresamos a Estados Unidos.
and I sent them to Kerry O'Donnell, who, as Claude indicated, is
Secuenciarlas.
he sequenced them, and he's very fast.
La secuenció.
Within less than 2 days, I got an email. He said, well, Jim, I have sequences of 12 different morel species in Australia.
Dice, tengo 12 secuencias, 12 especies secuenciadas de Australia.
But they're all of them are known from Southeast Asia, and
Y todas son conocidas del sureste de Asia.
but he says the one you sent doesn't match any of
Las
those.
que tú
It's
enviaste no encaja ninguna de las 12.
it got to be a new species.
Es una especie nueva.
Probably we can say, at least for the moment, that it's endemic to Australia,
Es
the only
endémica a
morel.
Australia.
So I'm glad we didn't have breakfast with those last 4. But anyway, that's a digression from our.
Pero ya se dio cuenta que al menos dejaron 4 de las 80 que colectaron.
This is in Central Australia,
En Australia Central,
which is known to be a marvelous truffle-producing area.
es conocida como un área muy productiva de trufas.
It's in the Uluru National Park, that big
El Parque
monolith
Nacional Uluru, el monolito,
of a sandstone, is one of the best traditional truffle hunting areas by the Aborigines.
es una de las áreas donde los aborígenes buscan trufas.
However, that tradition has almost totally died out.
Pero esa tradición ya casi desapareció.
Now, mostly there's a few elderly women who
Algunas
still go
mujeres
truffling.
que aún
yeah.
buscan trufas.
You can see around Ayers Rock, or Uluru it's called,
Alrededor de la monolito,
it has canyons that come out, and during these thunderstorms,
en estas tormentas,
the rain comes down and waters that zone around the rock.
y el agua empieza a escurrir y se acumula en los alrededores.
But that's not the best truffle area.
Pero no es la mejor área para las trufas.
The best truffle area is in the surrounding desert.
Las trufas son más abundantes en el desierto que en las áreas húmedas.
Various vegetation types could be involved. There's some desert trees,
Varios tipos de vegetación. Algunos
some
árboles,
casuarinas that grow only in this species, only in the desert.
casuarina que solamente crece en el desierto.
But we don't know what the plants are that would be the mycorrhizal hosts.
Pero no saben cuáles son las plantas que son las asociadas con las trufas.
We're quite sure that they are mycorrhiza-forming truffles because they're in phylogenetic groups that tend to be
Estamos seguros
mycorrhizal.
que estas especies son micorrízicas.
Well, I've been going to Australia for, I don't know, 35 or 40 years, almost every year. And
Ha ido a Australia por los últimos 35 años, casi una vez al año.
during the course of that, I met an Aboriginal student, Lynette Little, in the middle here.
En ese tiempo se conoció a un estudiante doctoral del medio, Linet,
Working on her PhD, which she has gotten.
trabajando en su doctorado que ya lo obtuvo.
So we've maintained a friendship, and with a young mycologist that I've been mentoring, Todd Elliott,
Mantienen amistad con otro micólogo joven que está siendo mentor de él.
we arrived in Australia last year in June
Llegaron a Australia en junio
to find in a newspaper that there had been a huge number of thunderstorms in this same area.
y entendieron en el periódico que había demasiadas tormentas en el medio de este desierto, en el medio de Australia.
So we knew we had to go. We changed all our plans.
Cambiaron todos sus planes para ir a esa área después de las tormentas para aprovechar.
I called Lynette, and she said she'd be happy to introduce us to some of the
Le habló a Linet
elderly women who collect
para
truffles.
que les ayudaran a conocer a las mujeres que sabían dónde estaban las trufas.
So there's a couple of them. 6 of them were delighted to take us. So we had rented a Land Cruiser, which had
6 de ellas
seating for 8.
en una camioneta para 8.
And we learned that aside from being just very sweet and generous women,
Muy amigables y generosas.
they had not been going truffle hunting for quite a long time because they had no vehicles.
No han ido a buscar trufas en mucho tiempo. Porque
So
no
they
tienen
took us
vehículos
to some of their most productive truffle areas.
y los llevaron a las áreas más productivas.
Guess what? Same thing as in the Kalahari, on the Arabian deserts and so forth.
Adivinen que otra vez, lo mismo que en el desierto del Kalahari, se abre el suelo, la arena.
And here's Lucille.
Lucille,
She was about something in her 80s, but
en los
the Aborigines don't keep track of birthdays, so it's
probable
just
que
kind of a
tenga arriba de
guess.
80 años.
So she found a hump there with a truffle. Well, that should have been a truffle.
Encontró un levantamiento del suelo.
And just like the Kalahari women, she found a stick and loosened up the sand around the hump,
Muy similar como las mujeres del Kalahari con un palo.
fell down into the soil, and as you see on the lower right, pulled out a truffle.
Tentando el suelo, sacó la trufa.
Upper right is the fresh fruiting body. We were delighted because
Arriba a la
It-
derecha está fresca la
it-
trufa.
it's an ascomycete
Es un ascomiceto
and full of spores.
llena de esporas.
Now, it turns out not to be a new taxon, but it's one I had never seen fresh before.
No es especie nueva, pero no la había visto fresca.
The name is Elderia arenevaga.
El nombre es el Elderia arenevaga.
Very good. Arenevaga means the sand wanderer.
Arenevaga significa el que deambula por la arena.
And we got good sequences from it too, which is nice to have
Y
because
tienen secuenciada.
I don't think anyone has done that.
Que no cree que nadie lo haya hecho hasta ahora.
So there's my student Todd and some of the ladies.
Estudiante Todd, los dos.
This is probably the youngest one, Ella. I think she thought she might
Ella es
be
la más joven, la
she might be late 60s or 70s.
en sus 60, 70 años.
And you have a podaxis, I'm sure, in Spain.
Podaxis.
I'm not sure yet what species this is, but they're related to Coprinus comatus.
No sabe qué especie es, pero es probable que sea relativa a Coprinus comatus.
But instead of being inky caps, they dry
En vez de ser con tinta, son más secas.
because that's what deserts do to fungi. They dry things.
Eso es lo que hacen los desiertos a los hongos, los secan.
But they collected all of them, and I said, well, what are you going to do with these?
¿Para qué las colectan? ¿Qué van a hacer con ellas?
How do you cook them? And she laughed. She said, we don't cook them.
¿Cómo las cocinan? Dicen, no, no las cocinan.
But the spores are black, just like coprinus spores.
Pero las esporas son negras, así como coprinos.
But they're a dry powder.
Pero son polvos secos.
And they mix that with some grease
La mezclan con grasas
and use it as face paint for ceremonial dances.
y las usan como pintura para la cara, para danzas ceremoniales.
Well, again, I digressed, but here's another species of truffle from the Australian desert.
Esta es otra especie del desierto australiano.
And another one. I better speed up here. Here we are with our group of
Es el grupo de
fine ladies, and
finas mujeres.
all of us had a great time.
Se divirtieron mucho.
All right, let's switch to the North American deserts.
Ahora los desiertos de Norteamérica.
You don't need the little red light to see what areas there are arid.
No hay que necesario señalar con la luz roja dónde son los desiertos.
But here are the major deserts of southwestern North America.
Los principales desiertos del oeste de Norteamérica.
And there are desert truffles, at least in the southern ones.
También hay trofas del desierto, al menos en los del sur.
And guess what? Same thing.
Otra vez, la tierra se levanta, se abre.
But I've not been able to find any record of North Americans or either U.S. or Mexican
Pero no existe que haya un registro de gente del desierto que las colecte como en otros países.
But I'm sure traditionally, or there is a tradition of it, it's either not being shared or it's been forgotten.
Muy seguro que haya ocurrido, pero no está documentado.
There's one that's in the genus
Carbomyces.
Carbomyces, thank you. This is probably one you have in Spain too, the Cicotium
Este lo pueden tener en España, Secotium,
agaricina, I guess it is.
agaricina.
Probably not eaten, but
Probablemente
it's there.
no se coma.
But then we go to the west, into the Sierra Madre Occidentale,
Se va al oeste, pero ya en México
and there are truffles there
hay
too.
trufas.
Not necessarily in deserts, but in fairly dry
No
forests.
necesariamente en desierto, pero en bosques secos.
And do you want to read that? I
No.
like it.
No. Los terromares de México. En el verano hay trufas falsas que son encontradas en los montes altos de la región de Huachochic, que sirven como alimento para los indios o nativos. Los perros las asisten en encontrar este hongo y que son muy, les gusta encontrarlos y que los marranos o los puercos los utilizan para aumentar la grasa después de comerlas. Los coyotes, los osos, las zorras grises también las comen. Saben como una pera muy madura con un sabor a cebolla cuando por primera vez la muerden. Esto lo dijo un explorador noruego, Carl Holmsvold, en su libro llamado Unknown Mexico en 1890.
Now the Tarahumara are amongst, I think I'm correct, Efren, live in one of the more remote areas of the Mexican mountains.
Viven en áreas muy remotas en el norte de México, en el estado de Chihuahua.
And since this is a fairly recent report, hardly more than 100 years ago, I would be willing to bet that they're still collecting
Es muy
truffles.
probable que los nativos tarahumaras aún continúen, pero esta documentación fue del finales de 1800.
Okay, this is our last slide, so we won't have to worry about being late for supper. But this is a hypothetical time sequence, and I have highlighted in blue
Es una secuencia hipotética y tiene en azul
the earliest written record.
es el único registro escrito, documentado, en lo que mencionaban los amoritas, que son 4000 años antes de Cristo.
So all the rest are not highlighted in blue because there is no early record of them.
Lo de los egipcios y lo de los australianos es solamente una especulación, porque no está documentado.
But I list the Aborigines of Australia and the son of Kalahari as potentially gathering truffles as long ago as 40,000 years.
Él estima o especula que los australianos aborígenes y la gente del Kalahari es muy probable que hayan estado colectando trufas desde hace 40,000 años.
Now, the reason I come to that, a conclusion, is no humans occupied Australia.
La razón por la que especula eso es porque no hay humanos que hayan ocupado Australia.
Until there are different estimates, but some are that they first arrived in Australia 40,000 years ago. Some estimates are 60,000 years ago.
Hay estimaciones de que los primeros humanos que ocuparon Australia son a 40,000 a 60,000 años.
And the climate and soils of Australia that long ago are not all that different from what they are today.
Y los climas es muy probable que hayan sido muy similares de esos años.
So I'm assuming that there were desert-dwelling aborigines,
Es muy probable que haya habido aborígenes.
and there are archaeological digs of at least 40,000 years ago, as dated by carbon-14 and other techniques.
Y hay récord de evidencia arqueológica que datan de esos años por evidencia del carbono 14.
And for the same reasons that I've mentioned several times, when desert truffles fruit, they're easy to find.
Y por la misma razón, las trufas del desierto son fáciles de encontrar.
And I'm not quite as confident about the Kalahari because I've not looked up the climatological estimates of what the climate was that long
No
ago.
puedo decir lo mismo de los Kalahari porque no sabes si el clima ha sido el mismo o es muy similar al actual.
Then I mentioned the Egyptians. That's speculation because it was Herodotus being told that 2,500 years before.
Lo de los egipcios es una especulación porque Herodes.
He's been recorded as not being a extremely reliable historian.
Parece ser que inventaba muchas historias.
But you take what you can get.
Toma lo que
The other Mideastern countries, the Arabian Peninsula, and a lot of arid Asia, especially West Asia,
los del Medio Oeste y del oeste de Asia.
but there are no written records that I've been able to find anyhow.
Pero no hay registro documentado.
But one would need a much better library than I have access to really explore that.
Necesita una biblioteca más grande y más antigua.
So it's maybe a good time to stop, but if you have questions, I'll do my best, and thank you, Efren.
Tiempo para detenerse y si alguien tiene alguna pregunta. Uno, dos.
Well, we'll be around the rest of the week. If anything pops into your head, I'd be glad to talk about it. And other truffle topics as well.
Aquí estaremos toda la semana y si alguien quiere preguntarle algo durante las sesiones, si le quieren comprar un vino, una cerveza.
I understand that much Spanish, but I don't object to that comment. Okay, well, let's